Hello everyone, and welcome back to our new orchard workshop. Today we'll be talking about the initial maintenance that you need to do on your fruit tree after planting. My name's Katie. I am the program manager for Unity Gardens Orchard Program. This series is made possible through the Community and Urban Forestry Department in Indiana's Department of Natural Resources and in partnership with the Give and Grove, a national orchard network. So we did talk about mulching in the last video and how important it is to mulch your trees and mulch them correctly. So avoiding that volcano mulching where you put the mulch right up against the bark of the tree and instead doing this donut mulching is shown here. You'll want to mulch your tree when you first plant it, but you'll want to reestablish those mulch rings probably once or twice a year. You'll want to check on your trees, see if they need more mulch, and make sure that you don't have a ton of weeds growing close to your tree. Next up, this may seem really obvious, but it is important to water your fruit trees. They are plants and they require water to grow, especially in hot summers or in periods of drought. It's really important that you're getting out there once a week to water your trees. This is especially important for new fruit trees, but even your mature fruit trees, so older than 3 or 4 years, will need some water in periods of drought. And if you're not sure, always a good idea to water. So I highly recommend setting up a rain gauge somewhere in your orchard. Rainfall can be really, really regional. So down the street could get 2 more inches of rain than you got in the last week. So it is really helpful to have some way of monitoring exactly how much rain was in your orchard area rather than in your general area. So once you've checked your rain gauge, if you have not received at least an inch of rainfall during the growing season, so when your tree has leaves and is out of dormancy, you want to water with at least 5 gallons. You can measure that through a 5-gallon bucket like this man has in the photo, which you can find at any hardware store. Or you can use a hose, fill up a 5-gallon bucket once, count how long that takes, and then use that amount of time with your hose on the tree. And the reason you have to do that is because every hose is going to have slightly different water pressure, so you're not going to know from one hose to the next exactly how long it'll take for it to be 5 gallons of water. You want to water the tree slowly. You don't want to flood out the tree and then just water the grass around it, and then allow it to percolate through as you're watering. So along with watering, the most regular maintenance that you'll be doing in your orchard is just scouting. And that means you're just checking in on your trees once a week during the growing season. Is something growing weird? Are your apples almost ready to harvest? Is there some weird bug you haven't seen before that's in large numbers on your tree? If you're checking in on your trees frequently, especially if you're trying to do holistic care rather than use a lot of chemicals to deal with problems, it is important to catch those problems before they get too big to deal with. So you want to check in frequently, know the signs of when something is damaging to your tree rather than just like, yeah, there's some ladybugs out there. So this is my first large topic alert. We'll be doing a class on pests and diseases where we'll go into some of those things that you should be looking for while you're scouting. And I would really recommend you just do this while you're watering, check out what's going on with your tree. Next thing that you want to make sure you're doing in your orchard is keeping things clean, especially if you're trying not to use chemicals. It's really important to remove material that might keep disease or pests in your orchard. So that means ideally you don't have this much fallen fruit to pick up, but if you do have fallen fruit, you want to take that out. That's often where pests will hang out, and then as that apple breaks down, they'll burrow into the dirt and just reemerge in the spring and reinfect your fruit. Same thing with diseases. If you still have spores present in leaf fall or something like that, it'll just come right back out in the spring. So you want to make sure you're cleaning up material that is infected with diseases or pests. You want to keep your tools clean. So especially when you're pruning your trees, you want to clean your tools between trees and between cuts if you're working on an unhealthy area. And that will make it much, much easier to keep your trees healthy and make them less susceptible to diseases and pest problems. You'll also want to remove root suckers. So you can see in this picture, there's a lot of growth coming up from the base of the tree. This is really common, and a lot of people think, oh, this is just if I let it grow, I'll have another branch or another tree that will produce fruit. but this is actually growth that's coming from the rootstock of the tree. So if you let that grow, instead of getting that beautiful, Zestar Enterprise apple, you're going to get this weird apple. If it fruits at all, you're going to get something weird that probably won't taste good. So not only is it not giving you food, or at least not good food, it is crowding out the base of your tree. And if you let those develop, you'll start getting issues with the structure of the tree. So whenever you see those things start to sprout, just cut them out. This will be especially something you do in the summer. So this one makes people a little sad, but when you first plant your tree, it should be spending its energy developing a root system, getting used to its new home. It should not be spending its energy producing fruit for you. If you do let it produce fruit in the first couple of years, it will set off, it'll take a lot longer for that tree to become healthy, to grow stronger, and to live well into the future. So in the first year, ideally 2 years after planting, you want to take off the blossoms that will develop into fruit. This can be really sad, so I know people struggle with it. If you like the blossoms, it is still better to let the blossoms develop and then pinch off these fruitlets that you can see in this top picture. It's still better to pick those off than to just let the fruitlets develop entirely. You do not want to pick off the leaves. If you are not sure whether something is developing into a leaf or a flower that will develop a fruit, just leave it until you see the fruitlets. If you take off the leaves, you will remove the tree's ability to photosynthesize and make food for itself, which is not good for it. So make sure you leave the leaves. But essentially what you're doing is you're telling the tree, I don't want you to spend your energy making fruit. I want you to spend your energy becoming healthier so that you have a healthy fruit tree years down the line. Once your tree does start producing fruit, something you'll want to do early on in the growing season is go through and thin it. And this is when it's at least 3 years in the ground. And the reason for that is because producing fruit is one of the more energy intensive things that a tree is going to do. So if you let it produce too much fruit, it'll exhaust itself. So a lot of people who are like, oh, my apple only bears fruit every other year, it doesn't have to. What's actually happening is that it spent so much energy producing all of the fruit that it had on these fruitlets in that first year that it needs a break in the second year. And then what happens if you let each of these develop? A couple things. One is that branch gets so heavy that it's liable to crack right off. This is especially prevalent in peaches. And those fruits start to rub up against each other because it's so crowded that you get damage on your fruit. And then that is often where something like a codling moth will be like, oh, I'll just go in right there. I'll just go in right there. So it makes it easier for pests to target your fruit and make it less exciting to eat. So in the early summer, you'll go through and thin these clusters of fruitlets down to 1 fruitlet per cluster. And that will give your tree more energy, that will make sure that your branches don't crack, and that makes sure that your tree will produce next year. June drop is this period where the tree kind of thins itself naturally. So you want to wait to thin until you see kind of some fruitlets on the ground, and then you'll know, okay, the tree has thinned itself, now I can go in and remove the excess. So tree wraps are super helpful. We put them on in the winter season, and we use them specifically to protect the tree against deer and rabbits who might want to nibble at it. And the reason we need to worry about that in the winter is because during the summer, there's so many options for deer and rabbits to eat that are not your fruit trees that they'll take first. So all the annuals, the grass, the trees are not their first priority. But in the winter, when all of that's dead or covered, trees become their food source. So you want to make sure that you put the tree wrap on so that rabbits and deer don't nibble at your trees. And then you want to take them off in springtime. And the reason for that is because like we talked about with volcano mulching, it's bad to hold moisture at the bark of the tree. So you don't want to introduce disease or rot at the bark from these humid Indiana summers getting caught in that area. The other thing is you want to make sure you take it off so the tree doesn't become too big for the tree wrap and it gets girdled. And it's easier to scout and see what's going on if part of the tree isn't covered. So you take them off in the spring, early summer, put them back on in the fall. It also protects from sun scald, which may be a weird thing to wrap your head around, but essentially when there's so much snow on the ground, the sun reflects back on the snow and it can hit the tree. And especially when you have young trees where the bark is pretty thin, it can actually burn the tree. So similar to like, you don't expect to have to wear sunscreen if you're skiing, but if all that sun is reflecting off the bright white snow, you'll burn your face. So you also put them on to protect from sun scald in the winter. So another thing you might want to consider when it comes to maintaining your fruit trees is if you need some kind of spray program. This is a huge topic, so we'll have a class completely on this alone. Commercial orchards spray extremely often and with pretty harsh chemicals. So most fruit that you'll get at the grocery store, unless it's certified organic, and even then has probably been sprayed to get that level of fruit quality. And if you're struggling with diseases, if you're struggling with tree health, if you're struggling with fruit quality, you might want to think about integrating it. So we follow a holistic spray regimen that's all organic material and is a lot less time and energy than an intense spray regimen. And essentially it focuses on fertilizing the tree and like minimal insecticide, fungicide. So we'll have a whole class on this where we go over considerations in spraying and what each ingredient does and the timing of all that. Pruning is another really important part of maintenance that is a large subject. So we will have a class just on pruning, but we wanted to make sure that you know that it's part of the maintenance that you need to do in your tree. And pruning is really important for a couple reasons. One is it builds a strong tree structure. So when it bears fruit or when it gets a windstorm, it's less likely to break and it's able to hold that heavy fruit load. It improves the airflow and sunlight penetration, which helps with preventing fungal diseases and aids in ripening up your fruit. And you would remove disease and damaged branches, which is good from a hazard perspective. You don't want to leave a lot of dead wood on a tree that might break off and hurt someone. And you want to prune out stuff that's diseased so it doesn't spread. And typically, the one thing I would say you should do if you would like to help your fruit trees produce better fruit is prune your trees. So we'll be talking a lot about this in our pruning class. Now, as you are taking care of your fruit trees, it's also good to make sure that you're taking care of your tools. So things like your pruners, loppers, hand saws, ladders, you want to make sure that in the winter you're storing those away from the elements. You don't want to leave them outside and have them get rusted. In the winter you can oil anything with a joint. You don't want to use an oil that would oxidize and rust your tools, so we usually use grease or a 3-in-1 oil. Sharpen your tools. You don't want to be making cuts with a dull blade that can tear at the tissue of the plant rather than helping it. And if you have anything that's wood, oiling it so that it doesn't dry rot or break on you. Irrigation, especially if you have hard water, if you have lime deposits in your water, you want to take apart your irrigation every season so that it doesn't build up and break or be impossible to take apart. So we take apart all of our irrigation and put our hoses away, our fittings away, once we get close to first frost. And then in the winter, you can grease those fittings with beeswax or grease just to make sure that they're easy to take on and off. So here's a general breakdown of what that maintenance calendar looks like. As you can see, it is pretty spread out over the year rather than a garden where you're doing a lot in the summer and not so much the rest of the year. So I do appreciate that about fruit trees. January and December, kind of your months off, where if you have to catch up on any tool maintenance, that would be the time to do so. February and March is usually when we're doing dormant pruning. And then in March, if you want to add to your orchard, it would be March or April, you do your spring planting. You'll also start your holistic sprays when the spring starts and you're starting to move out of dormancy. Remove your tree wraps once spring starts. In April, you'll pinch off blossoms on those young trees and begin watering them regularly. And then for the rest of the summer, it's just watering and scouting to see if there are any problems and harvesting and then thinning that fruit in the initial part of the summer. And then in the fall, you'll do another holistic spray if you'd like to follow that regimen. Expand your mulch rings, double check all of those things, put back on your tree wraps, and that's kind of a year for you.